Okay. If you would turn to Romans chapter number 4. Okay. So Paul starts off here and he's asking about what shall we say? Abraham, our father, was found according to the flesh. For if Abraham was justified by his works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. What does the scripture say? Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now to him who works, the wages are not counted as grace, but as debt. When it comes to righteousness, there's at least three kinds of righteousness. Maybe somebody knows of more, but you've got the righteousness of God, his saving power. The Old Testament is just full of Yahweh's saving power, and not always in the realm of salvation. He brought Israel out of Egypt. He saved Daniel at the lion's den. You know, then you've got the righteousness of the law. You've it's your rewards. It's not a righteousness that brings salvation, but it brings rewards for your doing what is right. Jesus talks about this in Matthew chapter 5. Who's least in the kingdom? You got the parable of the talents. And then we have the righteousness of Christ. This one brings eternal salvation. The Jews, they did not understand this third type of righteousness at all. And the concept that their sin made them deserving of death, it just did not resonate with them. They just had this idea that their going to heaven was locked in because they were a child of Abraham. So here in verse 1, there's a key phrase here. Paul says, by his own efforts. And the Jews just had this idea that because they were the child of Abraham, like I just said, they just thought that Abraham's righteousness got imputed to them, and that was it. But God counted Abraham's righteousness, counted him as righteous because he put his trust in God. In verse 3, Paul says, his works did not make him righteous. And he quotes Genesis 15:6 there. And then he uses the analogy that someone who works for you is not being given a gift when you pay them. They're simply being given what they were owed. But to him who does not work, but believes on him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is accounted for righteousness, just as David also describes the blessedness of the man to whom God imputes righteousness apart from works. Paul brings King David into this discussion by referencing Psalms 32. And he says, a key point that where God forgives and gives righteousness to those who have sinned. but the sinner does not deserve that righteousness. It's a gift from God. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord shall not impute sin. Does this blessedness then come upon the circumcised only, or upon the uncircumcised also? For we say that faith was accounted to Abraham for righteousness. How then was it accounted? While he was circumcised or uncircumcised? Not while circumcised, but while uncircumcised. And he received the sign of the circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while still uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all those who believe. Though they are uncircumcised, the righteousness might be imputed to them also. And the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but who also walk in the steps of the faith which our father Abraham had while still uncircumcised. When God called Abraham and told him, "You will be the father of many nations," Abraham was a Gentile. At this point, there wasn't such thing as Jew. And so, you know, I don't I do not understand why it is so hard for the Jew, whether we're talking, 2,000 years ago when Paul wrote this, or whether we're talking about today in 2026. I don't get how it is so hard for them to understand that they are not the they're not guaranteed their passage into heaven. Yet, I guess sometimes I think we do the same thing. Sometimes we think, well, I go to church. I, you know, I mean, back when we went to church on Sunday, I mean, we didn't miss a Sunday service. I mean, we just didn't. I mean, it was just the way it was. And I never thought about it. So I guess in the same way, I I do the same thing. I did the same thing that they do, and I think it's easy for us to do that. I think it's easy for us to look at what I'm doing, whatever it is I'm doing today, and think, well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm judging myself against myself, and I'm matching up to me, you know. And I think that's what was going on. I think this is how Paul is trying to address this problem that's happening, and this is happening in the church in Rome. Verse 13. For the promise that he would be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made void and the promise made of no effect, because the law brings about wrath. For where there is no law, there is no transgression. Abraham's descendants would inherit the world, not because of some legal action, but because of his righteousness, his being righteous, in his faithfulness. That the law is not going to come for another 600 years or so. I mean, the law at Mount Sinai is centuries behind this happening. So he couldn't obey the law that was given at Sinai. He could, however, obey the natural law that God imparted to humanity. When Cain killed Abel and God asked him, "Where's your brother?" "Oh, I don't know. It's not my business to watch out for him today." Cain knew he wasn't supposed to have killed Abel. You know, he didn't want to admit it, but he knew it, or he wouldn't have answered God in that smart aleck, "I'll do what I want" attitude. Well, verse 15. I mean, this has caused a lot of distress, and you know, because the law brings about wrath. For where there's no law, there's no transgression. There's a lot of people who want to say, well, we don't need to spread the gospel around to people. We don't really need to be telling about it because, they're better off if they don't know. If we tell them about the law and they find out that this and this and this is sins and not doing this and this and this is sins, well, if they don't know about it, then they're not sinning because they don't know. I mean, there's people that think that way. You know, but failing to keep the law, it brings wrath. And they use this just trying to, well, I don't really know why they try to use it. It just doesn't make sense to me, but it's asinine thinking. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. And I kind of think it's stepping pretty close to blasphemy. You know, I I mean, no scholar or anything about it, but it would seem to me that this is pretty close to blasphemy. Therefore, it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations, in the presence of him whom he believed. God also gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did, who, contrary to hope, in hope believes, so that he became the father of many nations, according to what was spoken. So shall your dependence, so shall your dependence be. And not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, since he was about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving God the glory. So the Jews just heard Paul take their favorite patriarch, Abraham, give him to the Gentiles, and here you go. There's a new Uncle Abraham. Gentiles, Jews, all of you. Now you've got Abraham as an uncle, as a grandfather, as a whatever you want to call it. It goes back to him pointing out to the Jews, thinking, that they did not need God for faithfulness, but simply the fact that they were Jews. Jews who thought that way were, they were wrong in that way of thinking. The Gentiles who think that we have nothing in common with the Jews are wrong in that way of thinking. I mean, how many of us have heard, well, those laws, that's for the Jews. That doesn't apply to us. You know, the Gentile Christian is grafted into Israel. And when you graft something into something else, if you graft a branch of one tree into the stalk of another tree, it's not the branch that takes over running the operation. You know, Yahweh gives life. He's the creator of everything. Abraham could not be the father of many nations if he did not have a son. And Abraham believed that somehow him and Sarah were going to have a son. He surely did, but did he have his doubts? Yeah, apparently he did. I mean, him and Hagar decided to go do their thing. So, yeah, I would say Abraham at some point had his doubts because, we've been waiting a while and God, where's this? What's going on? You know, do I have my doubts? Do we all have our doubts that somewhere, but God, you promised this, you said this, and I'm not seeing it happen. Do we have our, yeah, we do. I know. I mean, so we just, we have those doubts, but we also have the ability to turn aside from that doubt and return to what God said. Where did I stop? I think I stopped about 20. He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God and being fully convinced that what he had promised, he was also able to perform, and therefore it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now, it was not written for his sake alone that it was imputed to him, but also for us. It was not imputed to us who believe in him who raised up Jesus, our Lord, from the dead, who was delivered up because of our offenses and was raised because of our justification. The story of Abraham might be the earliest gospel message that we have. If you take a look at what happened with Abraham and all, I mean, Paul's telling us how God, he made Abraham righteous and how he'll do the same for his followers. Just as he raised up Abraham and Sarah from the dead. As childbearing goes, I mean, this should not have happened. There's no way this should have happened. Yet God made sure it did because he had made Abraham a promise. And he's not slack in his promises. And that's hard for us to remember sometimes. It's hard for us to think. It's hard for me to keep telling myself, but God said, I need to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to do this. It's hard for me to remember sometimes that God made a promise, and I don't have the authority to override it. You know, I don't have the authority to say, well, yeah, but really, I mean, that was a long time ago, you know. So I guess the drift of what I'm trying to say today is even though it seems like you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and I'm not seeing it and what is going on here? And God, come on, I mean, Paul was waiting. I think Paul was expecting Jesus to return. I don't know, maybe in his lifetime. I think the apostles, they expected Jesus to be back, before long. Well, that promise is still there. I have no doubt that promise is still there. And they died waiting on that promise to come. But just because it hasn't come doesn't mean it's not still there. No. Does anybody else have any comments or?
I do, but I was going to see if I know.
Okay. Sorry, Ross. We were in Romans chapter
Edward's
4.
got something. You said go ahead.
Everett, can you hear? Yeah, go ahead, Everett.
Yeah. Mentioned you didn't understand about the Jews, and certainly, yeah, they had a problem. But even back in ancient Israel, when Moses disappeared for an extended period of time when he was up in the mountain, the people thought that in order to replace Moses, they needed to make a god, the golden calf, because they had become dependent upon Moses. We get comfortable with the way things are and how things are done. And they were comfortable with Moses telling them what they needed to do, so they didn't have to worry about it and taking care of things. And in the same way you sort of hinted at it, but yeah, we get comfortable with our leadership, and we depend upon them for telling us, what we need to know. But we need to build our relationship with our Savior and our Creator rather than depending upon other people to tell us what we need to do. At least that's my perspective on it, that we can get comfortable as well. That like you said, we went to church every Sunday, can't be all bad. But that's not necessarily what it's about. We need to keep seeking, keep trying to better understand, and don't think that we own the truth, but continue to seek it in whatever we do.
Everett, that's one of the things that I really do appreciate about Chris. He doesn't want to stand up here and be and he doesn't want this to be the Chris Deweese hour,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that, because I think that's a big problem in the church. I mean, big umbrella church here. We have people who they want to be the one that's seen. They want to be the one who gets the credit. They want to be and then when something happens, and say that something happens and they're all of a sudden gone. The church is left without their their rudder. They have no leadership, and I mean, there's a reason that military units are trained so that you know you can take over if something happens, and the church needs to look at it the same way. We need to have the ability to carry on. So you're a very, very good point, Everett.
Yeah, we need to tune into the real head of the church.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that's an excellent way to put it. It sure is.
I have all kinds of stuff to say about that, but yeah, I mean, it's not, you want it to keep going, and there's all these pastors and leaders out there who have Bibles with their name on it, or the ministry is actually named after them. Well, did you die for my sins, or did Christ die for my sins? Right? The it's just not, it just doesn't make sense to me. But and you want it to keep going, and that's where, Everett was in Worldwide. What happened after their dear leader died? It got sold off, dissolved. I mean, they watched all their tithe money get sold on eBay. Right. Right.
Really?
Yeah. And it happens even in secular world too, because what happened when Limbaugh died? Right. Limbaugh apparently was keeping us all together and normal for 3 hours a day. He died, and now it's like the National Enquirer, right? It's ridiculous what these people are talking about. So, you gotta have a mind for the future and understand that you're taking care of something that doesn't belong to you.
Right.
Yeah. Well, back on point though, the Jews, it wasn't without merit that they acted and act the way they do now, because they were carted off to Babylon because of mixing.
Mhm.
So a lot of the walls that they built about protection and insulation were to prevent that from happening again. So when the New Testament comes around and now the wall of separation is down and everybody's supposed to be mixing and with the trusting the Holy Spirit to bring everybody into the truth, they're like, whoa, we've seen this before. We are not letting these people in here. Right. And so they build up the wall, and that was a problem. Peter had the problem. He wouldn't eat with the Gentiles when the Jews were around. That crept in. That was a pretty big thing that they had to overcome, and that they didn't actually have the the monopoly on Yahweh. And so that was a big reason why they rejected a lot of the gospels, because they just weren't interested in mixing, and they saw it as mixing. They didn't see it as them being the ones who had the oracles to actually bring these people up to speed. They saw it as a takeover by the lawlessness of the goyim, and so they resisted it. Not it's you can I can understand the mindset.
I had not thought about it in that vein, but that makes sense. That really does. Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of in Luke 4, when Yeshua starts his ministry, he does say, were there no Jews that needed help when Elisha and Elijah did these miracles and they were trying to kill him? He was going right at what you're talking about, saying, you guys better be prepared, because this isn't just for you, right? And it never was. And so that was an ingrained thing. But a lot of it says the coffee's hot on the McDonald's coffee cup because somebody burned themselves. So their reaction was due to that. But anybody else have comments? Oh,
I say that's the difficulty of this particular faith, is finding and holding that particular line, because the Jews like to draw the line before you get to it. And another body may say, okay, and today we're getting into a place of getting after that line and saying, okay, we can allow these things and still call ourselves within the word, and trying to find that particular line of action, path, where you're guarding the law, and just the law itself is the real delicacy of this faith, is, is finding it, what, in describing that again, and what is appropriate to do and what is not appropriate to do is like I said, the Jews put all these guards in place so that none of those bad things would happen. And we got Christians these days saying, okay, we can do these, we can allow these things and still be acceptable. And we're trying to find this with one path right down the middle that actually just does what the law says you can do, and doesn't, not prohibit what the law doesn't say you can do, but not do what the law does. Have I got that right way around? I think I got that backwards. I think
we know what you're saying.
Okay, all right, appreciate that. I did have a question. Did have a couple questions come up. I was trying to look back, and Abraham obviously had to be practicing righteousness, or at least practicing some sort of something that the Lord recognized him and called upon him to give him this covenant. But there doesn't seem to be any real indication of it, because it goes directly from the genealogy, from his genealogy directly into that first promise. So I know it doesn't refer to it, but Abraham was doing something right for the Lord to choose it.
Right. The same thing with Noah. We don't have what Noah was doing that made him righteous, yet God saw him as righteous from everyone else, But if they had anything we don't know it. Well, I mean, if he had anything written or anything of that nature, we don't. But we know like I said, Cain knew when he killed Abel, it was not to be done, So there's rules or laws or whatever you want to call it that I think God just puts into mankind, that things are not right innately.
Everett, you got something?
Yeah, of course, Genesis 26:5 is pretty famous, that Abraham kept my voice, my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Just because it wasn't recorded for our benefit doesn't mean that he didn't understand that. And I think Yah explained to Adam for sure what his expectation was for his conduct. If not before the fall, certainly after, First Chronicles 16, verse 15, basically said that remember his covenant, the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and confirmed it to Jacob and Israel for an everlasting covenant. That the covenant was basically the same. His covenant is the Ten Commandments. And so Abraham certainly knew that information from a young age. And he actually evidently did it, which was evidently somewhat unusual.
Do you think that maybe God had already given, like the Ten Commandments, to Adam, to Abraham, to Noah? I mean, do you think that could be? It's just,
for sure.
That we may not have had it written or anything, but yet he had already given it to them. I mean, do you think that could be?
As a matter of fact, there's a pretty famous traditional Christian theologian, guy by the name of Karl Barth, that said you can't read Genesis without Exodus. And what he meant by that is that, of course, Moses wrote Exodus, but he wrote it to the experience of his peers, the experience of the people of Israel when he wrote it to them. And he wrote it expecting that they would understand that it was the same God that had been working with them that worked with those folks in Genesis. And so consequently, you have to understand that Moses in his writing assumed that the people there knew what folks in Exodus were going through. Or at least the expectation of what God put on Israel, that there was nothing unique. His covenant was observed by Abraham just as much as it was expected of Israel.
So, yes, maybe, and no. No, but no, I agree. It says when he kept the laws, ordinances, and statutes, we realizing that Genesis was not written as a journal. It wasn't written in the days of Genesis. It was written then that's probably what it means. And we can see some of the very esoteric laws in pre in pre-Abraham times, right, or in pre Moses times, because of Judah and Tamar, right, that the son, the next in kin, is supposed to take the wife if the husband dies without kids. That is a very, very specific law that was given much later, right? So that was obviously in effect before it was given at Mount Sinai. So you could see some of it. But the specific reason that we know what Abraham did to be called righteous was leave paganism. That's the specific thing he did, because his dad was an idolater and he crossed over. So that's it. His path and our path are identical. That's why Abraham's our father, because we all come from paganism. Even though it was called Christianity, it was Christianity with paganism, and we chose to stop the idolatry and adopt the ways of the one true God, which is exactly what Abraham did. So that's why we're children of Abraham, because when we get called out of Babylon, we cross over, right? So Abraham had to actually physically leave his father and put miles between them. I'm passionate about this because the same exact thing happened to me, right? Right? Where I had to put 1,300 miles, where God put 1,300 miles between me and my family. And then this happened. And so I can completely relate. So the thing that Abraham did was he stopped paganism and adopted the true worship. And that's his righteousness. And he did it, apparently on his own, or, through the power of the Holy Spirit. And then he gets called later. So that's pretty cool. And Scott's got the mic and I didn't see. So I'm sorry for stepping on it.
No, I don't know how many here are familiar with C.S. Lewis, but the first 3 paragraphs of his book of Mere Christianity, I wish I could sit here and read it to you. He talks about people quarreling and people, coming up with the common statements of saying, well, you did this and that's unfair, and you're not, that's not mine, not yours. And he makes the case that both people seem to be coming from a common standard, or they couldn't, and they both know what the standard is, or they wouldn't be quarreling about what the standard is. One person might make a justification why their behavior should be excused from that standard, but they both know what the standard is. And I think that's part of what Paul talks about with the spirit of man, that each one of us has in himself had base level of knowing, and right down to children. To your 2-year-old will tell you that that's not fair, because they already have ingrained with them that's not fair. They know what fair is and what fair isn't. So I think when you talked about Cain and the Lord coming to Cain already had that within himself to know it. It just wasn't written down, and the fact that the Lord had to write it down shows just how many people were willing to violate that law.
Deborah, did you get wounded?
Oh, I have a couple of little pre-cancer things I'm trying to burn off.
Kay here noticed since she wanted me to ask. You got any more points?
Well, the thing about the law and what is and what isn't, Abraham didn't tithe to Levi, but that was required in the law. Jacob had sisters for wives, and that is, unqualified by the law. There were things that sort of spilled over. That apart from strictly the Ten Commandments, and we need to realize that. But the law was added because of transgressions, by and large, and specifically, it's the Levitical system that Abraham got along without and did just fine.
That's interesting because I had not thought about it in that light ever, that the law was added.
Yeah, that's what the scripture says, but we've been taught that that doesn't really mean that, but
yeah, that's because that's, I'd never connected the two. Thank you.
Sacrifices were added. Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of Everett's big points. Tiffany was asking a sidebar, but which caused me to forget why I turned this microphone on.
Don't worry, Chris. It's the gray hair that causes it.
I've been having the old man couple of weeks. The wives. I mean, there's some inconsistency, but they had something. And what I was going to say was kind of an analogy about Thomas Jefferson started this college. This is I don't know if it's a legend or if it's true or something, because he was all max liberty, max liberty, max liberty. So they were just going to have this college with no rules or something. And it turned into the Lord of the Flies, right? And it just dissolved. And so that's why in this side of the kingdom, we have to have rules. We have to have them, right? We have, as Scott's talking about, we have to have a civilization and we have to have rules in order to know what's right and wrong. If this Pollyannish view that with we don't really need a law because everybody knows what's good, the libertarian type situation, it doesn't work. Somebody always takes advantage, and your idea of liberty might be different than your neighbor's idea of liberty. So things have to be defined. And while we get refined on this side of the kingdom, but then when we get to the New Jerusalem, then we don't need the Torah anymore because everybody who's been through it, knows what's right and wrong, which is kind of what it was like in the beginning. In the beginning, Cain and Abel, they should have known. And this is the question I'll pose that's not answerable. Did Cain know it was wrong before his brother died? He laid in wait, he hit him with a rock. But did he know that the guy was going to die after he killed him? Now he knows, right? And now we need punished, and now we need boundaries and stuff. I don't know the answer though. Scott?
This is where I'd love to read from the book that shall not be named. No, well, because but it. Now you made me forget. Oh no, but that's precisely what the Jeremiah 31, 32, the new covenant, is that the law that was written before on stone tablets will be written in our hearts. And so we'll have a full, it's, Cain may or may not have known it, but it wasn't until after it happened that he had the, what's the word I'm looking for? Consciousness. Remorse of conscience. That's what I'm looking for. Remorse of conscience for it. But it wasn't defined. And without being defined, it didn't have a judgment or punishment attached. And without those two things, it couldn't be really counted as punishable. You have to have it. You have to have a punishment fixed ahead of time, and that's what wasn't there, was punishment fixed ahead of time. If we're finished with that, I have
Well,
one more.
but I have a question on that.
Okay.
In that line of thinking, then how do we deal with the guy when they were at Mount Sinai who goes out and gathers sticks on the Sabbath, because the law had been defined that you weren't to do work on the Sabbath, yet they had to put him in jail. Moses goes and says, God, I don't know what to do here. I mean, you told us not to do it, but you didn't say what to do if somebody does. So how do we deal with that? And they wind up, God says killing. So how do we
I'd have to look back. There is a point in the scriptures, and I don't know precisely when it is, but there is a point in the scriptures that says that those who go, it's the word I'm looking for, don't do the Sabbath, go against the work on the Sabbath, will be cast out. And I don't know if that happens before he's seen gathering sticks or after gathering sticks. I mean, you have the clear violation there. He had the clear violation that had happened because they'd been told not to do it. The only question then becomes, how do we respond to it?
What was the punishment?
What was the punishment, appropriate punishment for it? And that's the question then the Lord had to answer. What's the appropriate punishment for it? Because he was already told not to do it. There just wasn't a punishment affixed to it yet.
Right. Nobody knew what to do about it when he did.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, down in back to Romans 4, verse 19, without becoming, and I'm reading from an NASB, I'm not sure which NASB it is. Without becoming weak in faith, he contemplated his own body, now as good as dead, since he was 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. Yet, with respect to the promise of God, he did not waver in unbelief, that grew in faith and strong giving glory to God. So, Paul's testimony is that Abraham was strong in faith and believed in it. And yet, at some point, he's moved off of that, apparently by Sarah, who says, this isn't happening. Why don't you go and take my handmaid and do that? So did he lose his faith, or was he pushed off of center by an influence outside of himself? And
I don't know, but I think he must have had some wavering on his own, some questioning on his own, or when Sarah told him to do that, he would have said, no, we're just gonna stand by and we're gonna wait. So I'm thinking that Abraham must have been having some doubts himself, but of course, we have no way of knowing. So, that's what makes me think that Abraham may have had some doubts of himself.
And that brings me back to walking the line, as the good singer would call it. Is where is that line, and can we stand on it, and can we guard it and stay there, and not be moved off of it? And Adam got moved off of not being in the garden. Abraham got moved off of waiting for the child of promise. We see these examples of people being moved off of center and having to come back to center.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's probably got a big part of where straight's the gate and narrows the way, Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, before I lose this thought again, and then Everett's got something, but when we talk about the works and how we get this bum rap from the Sunday Christians, they're more works-based than we are. And they'll be quick to judge. You don't doing this, you're not doing that, you're doing this, you're doing that. for me, I don't, I was down this week. I was down hard. I didn't once think it was works related. I didn't, but I was just like rolling with the punches, right? Once you read the Bible and you figure out what you're supposed to do and when you're supposed to do it, it's very liberating. Because once you have those guardrails, you can live your life in confidence that have a relationship with the creator, and whatever comes your way, it's just kind of right. And so I don't know. I mean, they think they think that us keeping the Sabbath, that we're sitting over here every Sabbath getting together going, we're not like dead, right? And we kind of do that. We kind of go, yeah, we're called out. We're not doing that stuff anymore. But we want them to join us. We don't want to condemn anybody. And we're not sitting over here thinking that, I've kept 52 Sabbaths in a row. I'm so holy. Right. Right. No, it never comes up, So Everett and then Tiffany.
Yeah, as far as Abraham and Hagar goes, Hagar being Sarah's slave, in effect, was an extension of Sarah. And so consequently, maybe it was kind of blurred in their mind or in Abraham's mind as exactly how his child was supposed to come. It wasn't supposed to come by Hagar, but what he did with Hagar was not illegal at all. Particularly if you read chapter Exodus 21 through 1 through 4 or 5, something like that, that the child of a slave is the child of the master, because the slave is just an extension of the master, in this case, Sarah. So, from that aspect, that wasn't nearly as egregious as what it might seem. The other thing is that the record we have in Exodus 20 through 24 of the covenant was written to a nation, and they had judicial authority. We, of course, don't have judicial authority, so it's not our responsibility to stone people and that sort of thing. But as far as his law written in our hearts, I don't think we need to wait for that until that happens. We need to diligently examine, particularly the original instruction, and from my perspective, as well as what was added later, to understand it and to know it, so that in any given circumstance, we can make a decision as to what's right, what's not, or at least improve our decision anyway over what we might otherwise make. I think it can be written in our hearts. God writes it on our hearts with our own hand. I don't think He's going to do it any differently in the millennium either. I don't think He's going to put a funnel in our head and just kind of pour it in. It's something we've got to feel and act on and be a part of us, part of our nature, through our own efforts with His help. Cool.
I think with Abraham and Lisa, what I said, where that came from, Sarah, I think he was trying to please his wife. That's how I interpret it, is that he was just trying to do what she wanted and whatever. But that's just my own opinion. But then as far as like Christianity, they say it's a moral law. They keep the moral law. And I heard something today, I think it was today or yesterday, about the moral law. It always can be moved. You can change your morals. And so do you believe in same-sex relationships or not? Is it moral or isn't it moral? Well, now it's moral, but before it wasn't moral. So the moral law can always be moved. And so that's the problem with Christianity, is they accept it based on what's moral now, not not Yah's laws.
Well, and that was a part of the problem that they were having at the church in Rome.
Mhm.
A big part of the problem there was because homosexuality and just sexual perversions were so rampant in the Roman Empire that these things were just normal. I mean, basically like we've got today.
Yeah.
We're supposed to just accept that whatever is perfectly fine. And that's what they had done in Rome. So that's the first two chapters of the book basically have Paul's addressing that very issue, Tiffany. You're
Because
right.
with Christianity now, it's more of a Greek thinking, like the moral law, instead of Yah's law. So that's just how that's come about over centuries. But and then the other point I wanted to make about the law written in your heart, that's when Yeshua came and he said, I'll now place it in your heart, right? At that point, it's in our hearts.
So Ross asked, hello there. When did lawlessness creep in? Yeah. And
It's
Tiffany asked, what did you ask?
Law written in our hearts,
Was
wasn't
written-
that when that came in when Yeshua died? But he said that now the law is going to be written in your hearts. So we're not waiting for it to be written in our hearts. It is in our hearts. If you accept the Yeshua, if you accept the Messiah, then it's written in our hearts, the Spirit.
Yes, yes, but there's another part of that where it says that you won't have to teach your brother know the Lord. So we're kind of there and we're kind of not at the same time. So it might be like a micro fulfillment, but my contention is that you guys would not be in here if the Spirit hadn't written the law on your heart. If you hadn't woke up one day and go, something is not right. And then you went and you look, so yes, you're right. We have that now. But we look forward to a much greater fulfillment. Scott?
Two things. I think the lawlessness came all the way back from the Garden of Eden, because the question has always been, did God really say that? And that's the same that's the same question that Adam had to answer. That's the same question that Abraham had to answer, because God told him, your son is going to come from your own loins. And so, okay, do I play with it here and do I go? But when God really meant was he was going to come from his and Sariah. And that's, the same question. You have to keep asking yourself that question. Did God really mean what he said? The other thing is the law being written in our hearts. I believe that when we're resurrected, that the law is going to be written in everybody's hearts. So we're writing that law into our hearts and into our actions now, so that when we're resurrected, that's the law that we're familiar with. That's the law that we practice. Those who are resurrected that don't have the law now are going to find out the hard way that that's the law that they should have been practicing all along, and that's going to be to their condemnation. But they're not going to have a choice anymore, because they're already going to have their lifetime of not practice. It comes back to the parable of the virgin. I think it's the parable of 10 virgins. Some of them had the Spirit, some of them didn't have the Spirit, or didn't have the oil, and the ones that didn't have the oil, they didn't have time to go back to the merchants and get more oil.
Well, at least we have it recorded. Yes.
This whole thing, the conversation.
Well, if nothing else, then I'm gonna.
No, he asked, when did lawlessness creep in? It's not.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening.